to BPW Goes Digital. The speaker for today is Joscelin Yeung. She is the International Relations Chair of BPW Hong Kong. She works as a training and development professional who specializes in soft skill delivery. She is also passionate about public speaking and is the current president of a local Toastmasters club. And she believes that public speaking is a way to empower women. She has worked in a local and international NGOs related to gender equality and is a former intern at UN Women. Welcome, dear Joscelin. And today she will be presenting about the advanced version of Zoom. So now the floor is yours.
So today we're going to talk about the advanced usages of Zoom. As I know that many of us, we are using Zoom nowadays for online meetings and especially for many BPW purposes. So today we're going to walk through different steps that we can use Zoom in a more advanced way and a more professional way so that we can engage our audience and our members in different ways. Okay, let's start. As a Zoom meeting starts, we will always have to schedule a meeting. And now you can see on this page, there are many details that we have to input before we actually start a meeting, which is like the topic. Then you can input like BPW meeting, ABC. And for the description, it will allow your members to know what kind of meeting that they're actually anticipating and to make sure that they're not entering a wrong meeting. There are other details that you should input like when it should start. And there's also this time of the time zone. From a personal experience, the time zone is really important to make it right, as if you enter a wrong time zone, then the people will not be able to enter. And for BPW, if your event is also open to other international members, then it will allow people to enter at the wrong time or the right time, depending on their time zone. So do take care and check out, is it GMT +8 or +2, or is it UTC time? Just have an extra care on the time zone part. And for the last point on this slide, you can see the part on the registration. Now, for some of our webinars, they are open for other BPW members or even non-members to participate. For those, we may not necessarily need the members to register. But if you do not want other people just to keep bombarding into your meeting, it's always good to allow this option of ticking for the registration, so the members will actually have to type in their email and their other credentials so that they'll be sent a link for the email. So these are some of the basics that we should take care of before we actually start a meeting. Now, moving on, when we actually before we start a meeting, there are also other settings that we can also organize before we actually do that. Now, looking at the screen, there are some parts such as the video. You can choose whether your video, that means, for example, me as a host, whether it'll be on or off when you enter the meeting, and whether you will require the participants to have the video on or off when they enter the meeting. As for the audio, you can choose whether it is a telephone function or the computer audio function, or you can allow for both. So you may wonder, what is a telephone function? It's that there's also the option of allowing people to dial in, and in case their internet connection is not that stable and they also want to join in the meeting. This is when people would like to use the telephone option. As for the meeting options, there are many different options that you can go through. For example, to mute the participants upon entry, which I strongly recommend, as people just don't jam in, and even if they join in like 5 minutes or 10 minutes late into the meeting. And in order to enhance the privacy, we will also encourage you to enable the waiting room, which is when just like a real waiting room, and like in a conference center. But in the virtual setting, the participants will be able to enter in a waiting room, and they will wait for a host or a co-host to admit them. We'll talk about this slightly more in details towards the later part of this tutorial. And you can also allow to record the meeting automatically, for example. So there are many options that we can set, as you can see on the screen. Now, moving on, there are many other functions that now, as you can see in this screen, we're already in the meeting. And that, as you can see on the top of this, there is this function called Spotlight. For this Spotlight function, as you can see, I will be using this throughout the meeting, and you will be able to see this red little dot right here. then I can spotlight any function or anything that you can actually see, and just to make it more obvious. Now for this next slide, how does this little white window actually pops out? Is that when you go to the toolbar at the very bottom, now we're focusing on the toolbar at the very bottom part. When you click on the part on participants, you'll be able to see who is in the meeting. For example, as you can see, there's a host in the meeting now, and if there are other people in the room, then you can also see their name. Why do we have to click into this participant function? Is that you can actually do a lot of functions. For example, you can actually mute or unmute them using like the little microphone, using that little microphone button, as you can see next to the name. And if you are using a waiting room, you will also actually see the people who are in the waiting room at the bottom of the participant list. Now, as for many of the Zoom meetings, other than looking at the participants and also renaming them, it's also really important for us to enhance our engagement. And how can we actually enhance our engagement? Let us look on the right side of the screen. After we click the chat button on the bottom of the screen where there's a toolbar, usually there is a chat box which will pop up either as a separate pop-up window, or they will be embedded on the right side of the window. Why do we have to use a chat box? It's not just for you to randomly chat, there are many functions. The first function is that you can use it for just networking purposes. Before the meeting actually starts, you can actually post some guidelines or some rules inside the chat box. And for that, then you'll be able to just tell some house rules or some guidelines for the people who just entered the room for them to understand what's happening. The second point of using the chat room is that you can also share files, not only through the screen share, because the screen share will mean that everybody will see the screen. In the chat room, you can share something more subtle, like, for example, the agenda of the meeting, of a BPW meeting is going, or some background information that you want people to click in throughout the meeting. The third thing is that we can also use it for networking purposes. It's for people to just chat or even to ask questions during the meeting. Not everyone that in BPW likes to unmute themselves and to talk and to say their questions out loudly. So you may also encourage them to and invite them to type in questions in the chat box. The fourth function is also to increase the interactivity in the meeting. For example, when you ask, okay, so do you enjoy this session? Or for example, there's a very quick question where you don't want to use a polling, or you say, okay, do you like A or do you like B? Would you like BPW to do A or do B? You can just have the participants to type in the chat box really quickly instead of opening a poll function. So that's these are some of the points that we can actually use in the chat box, which is really, really useful. But there's something that I would like to particularly highlight is the point on the host. And because at the host, you can actually download everything in the chat box, just that it's just like a virtual secretary. You don't need like an extra person to actually copy all the notes into a Microsoft Word. You can just download and extract the notes, which is really, really easy. So I think that for the chat box, it seems a very, very easy function, but we can make really full use of it to make our webinars or our BPW meetings really engaging. Breakout rooms is also a really great function and and also an advanced function in Zoom that I believe it is really useful for our BPW meetings, especially for small group discussions. Now, how can we actually enable this breakout rooms function? Is that looking back at the toolbar at the very bottom of our screen, you can see that there's a function and it's called breakout rooms, which is the second button from the counting from the right. And there are some little squares over here, breakout rooms. Once you click on it, the reason for having breakout rooms is that you don't want everybody just jamming in and just discussing in the big rooms. And just like in a real conference room, there will be like perhaps 100 people in the big main hall, and there'll be concurrent sessions. And in the breakout rooms, we can actually hold concurrent sessions in the rooms. Now, after we click the breakout rooms, you can actually choose to assign how many participants that you can actually be in, and you can also choose the number of breakout rooms that we'll actually be doing. For example, if there are like 100 participants, you can say that, okay, 100 participants, we want them to be split into 50 rooms. And you can choose the place of automatically. So 2 people will be in the same room, and for the host, it's a really easy function because the people will be randomly and automatically assigned to different rooms. So really easy function. But if you want people to actually like you want to manually assign people into separate rooms, for example, maybe according to their preferences or according to like perhaps where they belong to, you may also want to assign them manually. That's how you choose automatically or manually. And after you choose the setting of the breakout rooms, then you click the button of create rooms. When the people when the people are in the breakout rooms, there are many functions. So before going into breakout rooms, there are lots of things that a host can do. By looking at the screen now, you can actually see that there are different functions, such as you can actually move the different participants into the room automatically, which means that you don't have to allow the people to click it. Because usually when you enable the breakout room functions, if I am the participant, I will actually see a message popping out on my screen, and they say that breakout, like moving breakout rooms, and there's a button for them to click on it. If they don't click on it, they will never be able to enter that room. But by enabling the function that we see on the screen now, moving all the participants into the breakout room automatically, then you can make sure that, and you can ensure that they will just be transferred to that room automatically, just as what this option says. And I would particularly like to highlight the third function, which is for the breakout rooms to automatically end after like 30 minutes or 1 hour. This is a really useful function to avoid people from going over time. It's because when we go for like BPW meetings, if there's like a concurrent session or there's like a small group discussion, I know we like to talk a lot and to network a lot and share our ideas. So it's really important to share the time. And I would like to also say that like the countdown function is also super useful, because as a participant, you will get lost in the discussion and you don't know what to do. Some of the participants, they may be really nice and they have a timer on the side, but usually people forget about the time. So it's also good to set down the timer, perhaps like if there are just 60 seconds left or like 2 minutes, I would suggest to make it a little bit longer before the actual meeting ends, just to give enough time for the people to actually wrap up in the breakout rooms. So this is actually how the breakout room works. It's just to, in a summary, we click the breakout rooms, choose how many people, send them into their rooms after the discussion, get them back into the main room, just to make sure that the people don't leave the room, like just to not to leave like the function. Now you may ask, if I'm the participant and I'm in the middle of the breakout room and my connection just got lost, then what will happen is that you will not be able to go back into the breakout room immediately. And the host will have to manually assign that person back into the breakout room if that person rejoins the Zoom meeting. So that's something the host has also have to bear in mind, is that some people may just accidentally drop off in the breakout rooms, and you may need to also just monitor these people and assign them back into the breakout rooms, something that as a host we always have to remember. Other than the breakout rooms, you can, when we're in the main room and there are lots of chit-chatting or like just there's somebody presenting, sometimes there may be some people who just accidentally unmuted themselves. So how can we actually do to mute them? Other than clicking down here at the participant list and just muting them here, we can also do it right here. By clicking this three dots function, there are actually lots of functions that we can actually do for this particular person. Let's look at this toolbar menu in the center. For example, you can ask for that person to unmute, or you can ask them to start a video. Because lots of members, they just don't like to open their videos. So how can we encourage them to do so? You ask them to start a video, then there'll be a message popping out on the other end and say, the host requires you to start the video. And we hope that this will actually encourage more interaction as we can see their face. You can also privately chat with that person, which I find it really, really useful, because sometimes you don't want to broadcast like a particular message to everyone. You just want to tell, hey, hey, Mary, can you just like share this piece of information in the chat room? That's super useful for some meetings when you want to tell that person, like just like whispering, but you're doing it virtually on the chat. But make sure when you privately message a person, you're really just privately messaging the person, because I've seen people doing mistakes and just having their private message being broadcast to everyone else. So that's really something that we should take care of. And it's a little bit embarrassing when we do that. But practice makes perfect. So let's do more virtual meetings and we'll get hold of it. So no worries. And moving on, there's this function of make somebody as a host. Now, why do we have to make somebody as a host? Now, if I'm the host now, why do I have to make somebody as a host? For example, if I have to leave the meeting, for example, then I can assign somebody as the host before I leave, so the meeting can continue to go on without me, without the host stopping the meeting. I can also make people as a co-host. That means like a secondary host, and this person can do a lot of things. Now I can talk about like a few functions that we can do, like why we need some hosts and like everything. If I'm the MC of the whole event, I would recommend the MC to only be the MC. What does that mean? It's really just to focus on presenting, like myself. I'm just presenting and just saying, like, introducing, okay, today's agenda is da 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 da, and I'll just be inviting people to speak and all that, but not doing all the technical things. But who will be doing all the technical things? I personally suggest that there's at least one or up to 1 to 3 people who will be at the back end being the co-host people. And what would these co-hosts be doing? For example, the first co-host, they can be doing just make sure that everybody's audio and video and like the muting people, because often, as I mentioned, people just randomly unmute themselves, and you just need one person to actually make sure that everyone's audio and video is doing fine. Another function of the co-host or the host is that you need to let people in the waiting room to come in. As I mentioned, there's this function of waiting room, and if there's nobody go into the waiting room to admit those people, the participants would just be waiting in the waiting room and just forever. And it's really sad for them because they can't go into chat box, and we just need a special person. They'll be just like a guest ambassador. We can give a nice name to those co-hosts who'll be monitoring that. We can also have a co-host who also monitor the chat function. Because the person, just for example, if I'm happening in the chat, and that can also be like a Q&A master or like a chat master who can be responding like to some questions that perhaps MC may not be able to respond. So that's also some functions that the co-host can actually do. And for most of the functions that the host can do, the co-host can also do, for example, like they can also share the screen, they can also do the recording function. The only function that the host cannot do is to enable the breakout rooms. So I would strongly encourage you to have this co-host function. Now the last function on the screen is to hide non-video participants. Why do we have to hide non-video participants? I would say that's really useful when we want to take a photo. If imagine in the screen, there are like tons of people. There's like 40 people in this room, but there's only like 10 people opening the camera. So you only see like on the screen of like 20 people, half of them is like black pages, and you can't really see the person. So it's gonna make this photo really weird. By hiding the non-video participant, you can actually take a really nice photo. So that's a good function that we can make use of, hide non-video participants. Other than doing like all the functions for a particular person, it's also great to do some backend things. For example, when we look at the toolbar function at the very bottom, there's this part called security. Now for security, as I mentioned, we can also enable the waiting room and to have some other options. To avoid people from jamming in and like for randomly sharing the screen, we can disable the function for participants sharing the screen. For example, if you're holding like a BPW webinar, which is obviously for other people, they should not be sharing other things, or you want them to be really concentrating, you can even disable the chat, you can disable them to share the screen, or you can even disable them to rename themselves. Perhaps there's somebody official who wants to rename them, then we can just disable all these functions. So it depends on our intention of using the meeting. But I personally think that not allowing the participants to share their screen, that's usually a function that we often use just to avoid people from jamming into our meeting. Of course, there's this last function of removing a participant. We don't usually do that, but if there's a person who is constantly disturbing, or there's just some person who, like a random person who just happens to come into our meeting, we also have to make sure that we remove the participant. So that's why, again, a co-host or somebody other from the MC should look after who is actually in the meeting and just to monitor. Just like in a real meeting, when you see some stranger coming in, you just kick the person out, but politely. We remove the person in the meeting. As you can see on the screen, it's a very obvious thing that it is a poll function. Yes, and as for a poll function, this is yes. As for the poll function, there's actually lots of choices that we can make, and there are many functions that we can enable. But before talking about like what do we actually do for the poll function, let's talk about why should we use the poll function and when. Is that when we usually perhaps when we vote for like an election, or maybe when we do some kind of important decisions, we can also use this kind of poll function because it is embedded in the Zoom meeting itself, and it's very useful and it's really convenient. If you're using a mobile app and for many of our participants, it will just pop out on their screen. And if you're just using on the computer, it will also come up on the screen, and it's super easy and convenient, and you do not have to use another voting tool or material. Now let's go through like how we actually create a Zoom function and like a Zoom poll function. As you can see here, like you can see why has the background changed? Like how come the normal background has disappeared? It's because before, if we have to create a poll, we can't create a poll inside a Zoom meeting. That means that as a host, you must prepare in advance. As you can see here, you will have to create a poll already in a settings function when you create, like before you actually launch a meeting. So you can see, okay, there's like the question, and you can have a single choice or multiple choice question, probably quite easy for us to understand. And we type into options like Tom and Jerry. And we also have the other two questions like vice president and secretary. In this case, it is a election voting process. You can also see this function at the very end, which is to add a question. Very easy for us to navigate. I'm sure they will all be able to do it, like editing the question, deleting the question. After creating the poll function, how can we actually launch the poll function in the Zoom meeting? While we're in the Zoom meeting, let's go to the toolbar at the very bottom. Next to the share screen, not the share screen one, if we move slightly towards the side, there's this poll function right here, some like stats bar, which is really recognizable as poll function. Once you click on the poll function, then you can say, okay, I have to launch I want to launch this poll. And the poll that we just created prior to the meeting will appear right on your screen. That's how what you will see. And if we say launch polling, we click, and this is what we see as a host. Of course, as a member, you don't actually see like the results, but you only see the options. So we can see the voting in progress. And once you see, okay, it seems that most of the people, they have voted like 80%, 90%, and you can just allow the people to vote until the very end of the voting. And then you can say, okay, now we'll be ending the vote now. And then in a 3, 2, 1, end polling. And then you just click end polling, and that will be the end of the vote. So I believe that the polling function is something really, really useful and embedded in the Zoom account if you are using a pro account. Of course, as all the meetings in BPW, we want them to be recorded, and perhaps just for other people who may not be attending the meeting to also revise the meeting. How can we do so? For the toolbar, there's this record button, easy for us to identify. We just click record, and there are two functions. One is to record to the computer, which is to your hard disk, and the other is to record to the cloud. So it depends on which one you want to record, because if you have too many things like stuck on the cloud, then you may want to record it on the computer. Really useful for us just for to have a recording purposes, and also for allow people to go back to the meeting if they were not able to attend that BPW meeting, for members to also visit that from all around the world. Perhaps just for example, for this webinar, we just put it on YouTube or on other places, and other people can actually see it. Now, for this very last function that I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to leave this PPT and going to demonstrate it live, because I believe that it's a function which is more interactive and something that we can use to make our webinars or our BPW meetings more engaging. Now, I will stop sharing my screen for now. This is the function of sharing our screen. For sharing our screen, there are two different ways. Let us go for this. When we share our screen, there are different functions. For example, we can share our whiteboard. This is a more basic and a more fun and interactive way. And you say, okay, so what can we do as a whiteboard? Now, as a child, we always like type in, like we can draw. For example, you can just draw random stuff on the whiteboard, but that's not what we want in the meeting. How can we do so? Is that I would personally recommend we use the whiteboard to do some brainstorming ideas for our meetings. We can invite our members to type like, okay, so let's do a brainstorming session now. Okay, brainstorming session. And we can invite all the members now in the meeting to actually type out like, okay, so I'm thinking of like a brain. I'm thinking of like a idea, an idea. You can also have 3 people typing in at the same time, and it's just like people in the real conference. Perhaps they're putting post-it notes or they're shouting out. But in this virtual whiteboard, we'll be able to see everyone's ideas. There's this really useful function of clearing all the drawings. Other than using it for brainstorming, we can use it for a more interactive polling. Other than using that like polling function that we just saw just now in the official Zoom function, I personally really like to use this kind of function. Now we can first draw like an easy way, it's like a rectangle, and then we can have some kind of, just to make it like a 4 sections. Let me create a 4 section. In a really, really quick section, you can do it live in the meeting. It doesn't really make it look as if it's really funny. For example, we can say, okay, for those who think that we should vote for idea A, we can put it here. For those who want to vote for idea B, you can put your idea in here. Just let me create these 4 functions. When you're getting more familiar, you realize that actually there are many colors that we can change for the whiteboard. Now I'm using green. You can actually also use like red or blue or black, just depending. Now after we have these 4 like categories, what I suggest to do is that we allow all the BPW members to say, okay, if you want to vote for idea A, then you can use a stamp. Perhaps you can use like a heart, and you can put your heart here, or you can use like a star, and you can put it here for engagement. But if you want to have an advanced interactivity, for example, for idea A, you can also collect opinions. For example, if you say like, okay, so what do you think about idea A, B, C, D? We can invite them to just using the type function immediately here. Like, is it a yes, but why yes? Is it, oh, because I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it, for example. So we can just invite people to type in anything that they want in this interactive whiteboard session, which I personally find it really useful. Something really great about this function is that we can also save it as a recording purposes and to share the things with our members afterwards. It's just like we do it on a whiteboard or in a PowerPoint screen in a real setting in the meeting. So we can just press save, and it's just saved in our downloads folder in the computer. After, not only that we can screen share, okay, this pop-up bar is also something that I should mention. When we screen share, often we just forget about the pop-up bar and we just don't know where the tool functions go. No worries. You just put your cursor up towards the top of your screen, and this toolbar will pop up, and you can just do lots of things with it. So let me stop sharing our whiteboard and demonstrate another function of sharing my screen. For many of our meetings and conferences, we will also share different meeting agendas. Let me use this testing page as an example. For example, we are demonstrating on I'm demonstrating this page, okay, there's an agenda, there's a long agenda that we have to go through. How can we make sure that people are actually keeping up and know which part of the screen that we're talking about? When we go back up here, like just go at the very top, just click annotate. Not only that we can use the spotlight function here, which we can keep people interested, just like using a laser point in the real conference, we can also use an arrow. Now, something special about this arrow is that you can actually see my name in the arrow, like Joscelin Yeung in the purple arrow. And this arrow is a temporary arrow that we can actually move it. Okay, now, for example, I can say, okay, so we're talking about point 1, then we're moving on to talking about point 2, like this. Super easy, and you don't have to use that red like laser button, which is quite hard to navigate sometimes. For this white button that you can see now on the screen, it will not be visible to our members and to our audience. It will only be visible to you, for the person as the host. So that's a really, really useful function that I think that many of our meetings that we can use, and especially if we're going through an agenda, like or we are voting in the BPW, like clauses, maybe like there's a 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, something that is really useful that I would like to share today. Now we can also clear the drawings and just click it and stop sharing our screen. So for today, we've gone through many functions that we have used, we can use for an advanced setting in Zoom, and I hope that this will be useful for us for our BPW sisters all around the world. And I hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joscelin, for a wonderful presentation on the advanced uses of Zoom, particular to BPW purposes. We can easily see through this presentation so many opportunities for how we can use this to not only replicate what BPW normally does now that we must do many things online, but also to actually enhance it. There are many things that we can do in this format that we can't do otherwise. And so this will allow us to actually grow our own skills, but also grow the value of BPW. We hope that this video has been useful to you and will continue to be in future. You might want to watch it a few times. We also hope that you're looking at the other videos in this series, BPW Goes Digital. Remember too that we have 2 live webinars a month, and you, any BPW member anywhere, can join us. For details on that, please see the information below. Hope to see you soon. Bye for now.